And in the same way, who we are and our understanding at the moment from a mental perspective is also just a representation of the actual terrain. So hopefully what has touched people's hearts, they'll be able to express that in a way that doesn't take us from the sublime to the ridiculous, but rather is an outpouring of the same truth. So about how to do this, I was going to read one, and then if there was anything for people to say, we'll pass the mic and discuss that. If something occurs to somebody, then we'll ask also the people here to speak about it. Is that all right? Yeah? All right. So I actually took two out because Shaykh Fadhlalla did start to speak about one just now in the Ramana Center, and I thought that for the benefit of the people who weren't there, especially our internet viewers, we'll make that available. But the first one, which was on top, was justice and injustice. The root of justice is in the reality of oneness, and injustice describes the perceived distance from perfect unity. Divine justice is not relative, and in truth, there is none other than that reality. Shaykh Fadhlalla has been talking about the fact that there is nothing but that justice, that whatever happens, it can only be that justice. Injustice begins with the perception of human separation and independence from oneness. Then we experience otherness, personal identity, and biography. Each human being is like a particle, which is only there temporarily due to its perpetual spiritual origin. Justice is to acknowledge and live in resonance with origin. Injustice is the illusion and identification with personal and conditioned consciousness, boxed within space and time. To realize the inherent injustice within our humanity is the first great step to transcend to the lights of divinity. Therein lies the just path. And as you know, there's in the book, The Spectrum of Reality, there's a description and then a bit of a summary. And the summary reads, when you identify with your biography, ego, or lower self, you are doing yourself injustice. The soul radiates divine justice.
So he's telling us something very deep in that. And this injustice that he's referring to is really our inability to move out of an illusionary existence. So you start with a deep injustice if you're not seeing that connectivity and the realm of consciousness and continuity, which are all present here. So what that is really saying is that the justice in terms of your day-to-day life, that's already been decreed. The patterns of life are already decreed. So how we live those patterns will determine our destiny. And if you're going to remain in a realm of untruthfulness or injustice, then you will experience according to that living. The same applies if you surrender to these truths, to the fact that every action will have a reaction, every atom of your deeds are being recorded, good or evil. So all those patterns are designed. So if you're in turmoil, strictly speaking, you've just moved out of the realm of a perfect designed pattern. And that's all it's alluding you to, that you've moved out. In other words, you've descended from paradise into a world of duality, and in that dual world, paradise still remains. So you can navigate in the dual realm where you bring your mind in it, because mind, that's where the mind is introduced, into that dual realm. When that ends, the mind moves off again. So we got to cross these bridges. Are you going to live through the mind, which is what Shaykh Fadhlalla was alluding to throughout his talk, whether you're going to live through your mind or whether you're going to find another reference point. Now that's important, because if you want to live through your mind, then you must accept turmoil. The two go together. In the realm and in the box of space and time, turmoil is present, but so is paradise. So what's the problem? The problem is you're stepping out. You're unjust. That is divine justice. So if you've stepped out, you can't complain about your situation at that time or your reality.
Does anybody have any thoughts, any questions, or anything? Yeah?
I love what Uni was saying now, because as he was reading, there was something that came to mind because you brought it in. And it's something that Shaykh has been speaking about, and I get to understand and taught through Sister Alia as well. Justice and injustice is a duality in and of itself. And duality exists in our day-to-day. For every turmoil that we have, in that very moment, we also have support. No challenge is ever without support. Verily, with every difficulty there is. But it's an understanding in that moment that when the challenge is there, that I can now instruct my mind to seek the support, or I can wallow in the challenge, which takes skill and it takes understanding, but it also takes being in the now, which is the oneness. So it's a beautiful way to get to understand how to live and be, because it's necessary, in duality in our day-to-day existence, but that within duality is the oneness, which is the center point, the state of gratitude, the state of unconditional love. And for me, that's actually what came out in that. It's a beautiful passage that was chosen. Thank you.
I don't know.
Anybody else? Really, if something has touched your heart, it benefits everyone for it to be shared.
I just want to remind us that the word to be unjust, to oppress, is directly related to the meaning of to be dark. Is to be in dark shadow. So it's the absence of light. So that's all.
So I'd just like to read the last couple of lines again, and just to expand. So injustice is the illusion and identification with personal and conditioned consciousness boxed within space and time, as Eunice was speaking about. In addition to that, to realize the inherent injustice within our humanity is the first step to transcend the lights of divinity. So there is an inherent injustice there that we almost have to accept. And therein lies the just path. So it's inherent but we don't have to identify with it. It's there and will always be there. We can't escape it, but we also know that within us there's the space of real justice.
Sometimes it's not always easy to be just and to refer to that and to maintain that awareness. So I don't know what you think would be or anyone here might think is a good technique to poise yourself to try to witness the perfection in the injustice. Do you have a comment on that?
I had a comment similar to your reflection, was that when you read Shaykh Fadhlalla's words in the spectrum of reality, or even in any of his work, you have to prepare yourself to read it. You need to put away concepts, be in a good state, because when he speaks these little, very concentrated words, they're from a 360 deep ocean of knowledge that's all interrelated. So if you don't, when you read it and you don't quite get it, so, like with your intellect at the moment, or that many thoughts come pouring out, connecting things that you conceptualize from your life's experience, this is all part of a process that you will naturally go through. But read it again. Read it again and read it again. Because each of these is like a doorway or a pipe to a deep ocean. All of Shaykh Fadhlalla's sayings in the spectrum of reality are like doors. Like we were talking about this the other day about Shaykh Fadhlalla's work. They're all doorways to entering into the vicinity of the Kaaba. It's to bring you into a state of unity. All roads lead to not Rome, but to Kaaba, to truth. So put yourself aside, quiet yourself, prepare yourself, and read it again and again, and Allah will show you the meaning in it. Bismillah.
Okay, I'll move on to two more actually, because I think from the discussion another one seems appropriate. So the first one is shadows of consciousness. Shadows are formed because of light. So too, the light of consciousness produces many shadows and darknesses. One end of the spectrum of consciousness is complete boundlessness, and the other end is dimmed with human veils and limitations. A consciousness black hole, if you will. Human consciousness encompasses body, mind, and soul. A pain in the finger focuses the attention to relieve that disorder. This is the shadow that indicates the light. So the desire to be stable and safe. Death is the end of personal conditioned consciousness. Human life is partial consciousness, yearning for awakening to permanent and complete consciousness. The summary: there is no light without shadow. Consciousness is a light with its own shadows and spectrum, except for supreme consciousness.
Yeah, so that's...
Consciousness. As soon as you have conditioned consciousness, you have form, and form, light falls differently on different aspects of form. You have a flat sheet of paper, but if you draw a square and a cube and you shade certain aspects, it looks like it's 3D.
Right.
So you're shading things, therefore it appears to have form. But with supreme consciousness, you can't talk about form.
No.
You can't talk.
Okay, so we're coming to the two zones of consciousness. That's clear. That means there's two zones of consciousness within us. The pure zone
Yep.
and the conditioned
Right.
consciousness. And as we're climbing up the spectrum, we're trying to get as closer to pure consciousness as possible, which you can't reach, otherwise you'll burn out.
But it also indicates the purpose, right? Because
Of the connectivity.
right, because if you don't have the shadow is what actually indicates the light. If there was nothing but light, you wouldn't be able to see anything. It's from the shadow, it's from the opposite that we're indicating, we have an indication towards the light. And our conditioned consciousness as a shadow is perfectly formed for each of us to indicate for us what direction or what the shape of the obstacle
Except for
is.
Except for one thing, this ID thing is there in the zone of duality. So on death, the ID is removed. So if you've conditioned your consciousness to believe that you're this ID, then you're going to find out, like Shaykh Fadhlalla says, if you didn't find it out now, you're going to find out at death. Because now the body doesn't exist. And still you have some notion of a continuity. So where is that residing? Because the body and the mind are now disintegrating. So it has to be resident somewhere else, that consciousness. Which means it's attached now. You've attached your conditioned consciousness to your pure consciousness. And you enter another zone with that baggage. So it brings about the issue of then what happens if there's a continuity. How do you continue? Do you continue in the same disharmony that you are here? Or do you bring your current life to a point where it becomes harmonious so that it's no more relevant? So you've got to catch this, otherwise you won't see the connectivity and the continuity, or you'll have a very perverted continuity in which you see yourself as a body all the time, and yet you know that it's disintegrating. So that means all that resides is consciousness. So Shaykh Fadhlalla is saying to you, so there is only that. So do you catch it? It has to be only that. Because you as a separate identity can't continue. It's something else that continues.
Anybody else?
I was just thinking if that consciousness could be uploaded into the cloud. It's a good mithal as well. But I haven't worked out the end of the mithal. You know, if you upload it into the cloud, you can't change it any longer. So that applies to the end of living life. You know, your individuated life. I'm not sure anyone's du'as and prayers once you have left can really affect your consciousness in the cloud. I don't know.
So the next one, alienation and integration, may cast some light on that. Negative emotions and the feeling of separation, individual identity, movement and change are the cause of most of our confusions and difficulties. I'll read that again. Negative emotions and the feeling of separation, individual identity, movement and change are the cause of most of our confusion and difficulties. Just about covers everything, really. Occasionally, we feel like aliens on Earth, and we have to cope with insecurity, fears, and other physical and mental concerns. We yearn for a reliable and welcoming home, and for friendships and connectedness that make us feel secure and happy. When the mind is subservient to the soul within the heart, a sense of stability and integration will take root. This unison is essential for a sustainable state of wholesomeness, head and heart in balance. And the summary? By transcending the mind, you experience integration and balanced well-beingness. By transcending the mind, you experience integration and balanced well-beingness. The whole thing? Yeah. Would anybody like to say anything?
Separation and identity. A human being is composed excuse me, of both energy and matter. Our physical part contains all the elements on earth, and our energy part resonates with astral energies, cosmic rays, and countless other invisible forces. A baby senses its separation early on in life and begins to develop its own identity and individuality. We behave like a laser electron, which becomes a particle when caught in human eyesight. Otherwise, it is an inseparable part of the wave entity. The baby thrives on interactions and stimulations by the mother and others. The ego grows by reflections and acknowledgements. The experience of being separate from others leads to identity, personality, and ego. With maturity and wisdom, a few may realize that the ego identity was a necessary filter between the soul and its earthly connection. The experience of separation hides our cosmic unity. The summary commentary: separation and temporary identity, in brackets mind, memory, and biography, close brackets, are preludes to this discovery of the reality of our soul. So that's the story.
It is the story.
If you live in separation, you will experience that. And if you live in unity, you will experience that. And your entire growth in this life will be experiential. Nobody can teach it to you. Can just teach you the doorways, the roadmaps. No, how can I teach you an experience? You've got to experience it. Anyway.
I think the problem of trying to go beyond separation is the fact that our separated existences, it's a very persuasive one. I am not you, you are not me, we're not connected physically, you know. We're all individuals, we're all coming from somewhere else, going to somewhere. So I'm saying that our daily experience reality keeps telling us you are separate. And not until you attune yourself to higher levels of consciousness will you see that you're actually connected. And it's very helpful to have, experiences of, I don't know, like today, of the unity of your own consciousness and field of consciousness with your own physical body and the connection between the two. And to have all kinds of other reminders and glimpses and tastes. And I think that's why we need to see each other and sit in each other's company and sing praise of the one.
Yeah,
to remind us.
All that is fine. You're going to have that. But by around age 40 or so, that's what the Quran says, you should have worked it out. That this was just a growing up experience. Till you realize, no. Behind every event that I'm witnessing or experiencing is another reality that's governing that reality. So I get away from blame and screaming and shouting. And Allah did it. He let it happen, like Shaykh said earlier. So what was the meaning of that? Get to that. So go to your root. So have another communication. Have another life. Don't confine it to this box of space and time. There is another life going on, but it's outside the box. And you can only see yourself if you go outside the box. So you'll witness yourself as well, because in that zone there's no IDs. And then you will get to realize that everyone is a soul, and you start navigating differently. So that's the journey, that's the challenge.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Also, it is, you have to, Shaykh Fadhlalla once said that every human being has a different fingerprint. And so there is you are created with uniqueness. And you are created with tendency toward mercifulness and generosity. All of these are the names of Allah Azza wa Jal. So in sort of dissecting this whole issue of being human and being relative and being ephemeral, you begin to notice that the uniqueness that you claim doesn't belong to you, because you are transient. We are living in a transient, ephemeral world. So where does the uniqueness belong to? It belongs to the unique. If you have a generosity in you, well, that's an attribute of the human being, but it is ultimately, the ultimate generous is Allah Azza wa Jal. So written within us, like Allah says in the Quran, that He did not create this creation, but bil haqq, with the truth in it. So you are the book. You have the path and the potential and the possibilities all written within us. And we have that absolute divine spark that is within us, that resides what we call within the heart. It is our essential reality. It is the source of who we are in reality, beyond attribute. But that reality is not knowable by the mind. So, there's a dilemma. How to then, we speak about supreme consciousness, but it's not something that you can know, because if you knew it, you wouldn't be you. You would not exist. But you can know and realize that your limited consciousness, your relative consciousness, indicates the transcendent consciousness. So that's the path of unfoldment. You witness yourself and refer it to the absolute. I'm giving something. Well, who's giving? It's my hand, but whose hand is it? Where have I taken that permission, like Shaykh Fadhlalla was speaking earlier? Permission is what? It means you remember that you've come from the source, that is the one is all of the reality of who you are, of what this whole creation, an apparent creation is. So it is not, it's a mystery. He is a mystery, the source is a mystery, but you are you have the capability of unwinding, unpacking this little bundle of humanity that you are, and that will lead you to that realization of the transcendent reality. So we all should take heart, and if we don't understand it, initially, we need to go over it, and this is why we have gatherings like this, and this is why Shaykh Fadhlalla writes prolifically like he does and generously opens himself up, because all of this is accessible. Don't think that it's not accessible. It's accessible. Allah would not have created us and created you individually if it wasn't possible. Assalamu alaikum.
So, possibly for many of you, I know for myself, everything that's been said, Shaykh Fadhlalla's talks, the company, it resonates very strongly, and I think that the reason people keep coming back is because it touches their heart. So I'm going to pose a question. It's a question that I've asked myself. I think that it's been explained, the answer to why this happens, but why is it that when we move back into the world, when we go back into our everyday lives, it doesn't always feel like we're carrying that same inspired state. The explanation has been given. Self-identification, the idea of separation, because it's clearly not possible if there's only truth, if there's only absolute reality. But we can't deny the shadow of our individuated reality as well. So the question I ask myself is, all right, how do I carry that? How do I take that into my everyday life? What happens tomorrow or the day after when we're not with clean mirrors and we're back into the muck of our everyday life?
You experience according to that muck. How can you not, when you move out of here, what changes? How do you breathe? When he said he moved his hand, how did he move it? What's the energy that allowed it to move that hand?
Sure.
So at what moment do you have a moment to forget that? So you're moving all the time with that energy. So you're moving in your out direction tomorrow with that energy. It's just your remembrance and your awareness that may be absent. That's it. So that will bring about an experience. From that experience, you will be able to correct.
Closer.
So, I mean, who can give you better love than that? You make a mess, he instantly reveals you made a mess and this is why. And then says, come back, I'll embrace you. I mean, try that with one of the human beings. So that's it. So, I mean, what love, what a passion.
So that was one question. I thought there might be other questions that people had.
Assalamu alaikum. I thought I would just pose a reflection, a question, a comment, all of the above, none of the above, in regards to what has been mentioned. And as Shaykh has said very beautifully for us, that do not deny the relative. And I think what often happens in these theoretical conversations, because it is theoretical, is we spoke about things, and our great shuyukh used to speak about things like dawq and taste and stages and maqam and hal, expanded states of consciousness, different stages in the progression of consciousness. But I think from the human perspective, from acknowledging personal consciousness, as you and I shared, Muna, when we spoke about Ibn Arabi, and you mentioned this earlier about you are a stepping stone to the divine. There's a purpose in that. There is a purpose in your relativity as well. So, for me there, and you also touched upon something quite beautiful of the unique shell that every self comes as, if you like, a piece of perfection, almost muhyi in a way. So, for me, the conversation has to, I think, especially depending on where you are, begin with the perfection of our path, which is adab, and that's courtesy. And that courtesy is to where you are. Shaykh has always said, how can you talk about the one if you yourself are not one? So I cannot walk around talking about supreme consciousness when that's not within my experience. It's important for me to be really rooted and grounded that yes, I am deluded. And that makes me bereft. That's a wonderful position to be in my view. Rather than walking around proclaiming about the supreme that you don't know anything about. So it's exceptionally important for me, and this sort of raises a topic of conversation, which is something I've been debating with some of companions upon the path, which is this dialectic between becoming and being. And our great masters used to speak about, they had this tradition of ghurur, which was effacement of the self, and yet ultimately the mechanism only serves its purpose to take apart the machine. In Idris Shah, he talks about why is it that there are no tariqas of Ibn Arabi? It's because after the work was done, there was nothing left. So I think that an appreciation, a sincerity, a capacity to be human is an exceptional step towards beginning to taste the divine. And from my experience, however limited that might be, the so-called mine, and we can laugh at it because it is so-called, and that's a good laugh to laugh. That's real spiritual laughter in my view. But otherwise we end up into the space of theorizing and creating complex paradigms that confuse people, delude people, and personally that is just not the bread and butter of the Muhammadi path, which is adab. So that's my comment.
Thank you so much. Does that resonate with people? Yes?
I was just going to say, I second that actually, because I feel like...
Hang on.
I hate to be on the mic, but anyway, we need to hear you. I was saying that the purpose of these gatherings is to take these teachings into the real world and apply it. So I think it's almost you in a state of euphoria talking about this, but people get so lost in conversing about all of this instead of implementing it in your life. So, like justice, it's actually acting appropriately at every moment in time. So, yeah, I'm just saying, like, we spend so much time talking about it, but then you go here, out of here, and like, people are doing crime, whatever they're doing in their lives, that's injustice. But then you come again to a gathering like this, you talk all about justice, and go back to your regular life. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ajita. Thank you. Anybody else? Those very strong comments. Please.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think what we're talking about is something that I refer to as the doingness of beingness. Because right now we are being, and we're in a beautiful state of being, in a beautiful state of consciousness. And rightfully, as Yuni says, this is our state. So when we leave, technically, we should be able to maintain our state, because it's ours to maintain. But again, coming back to part of the human conditioning, as Muna has spoken about so beautifully earlier on, we are affected by what's around us. So when Murtada speaks about the question that he asked, and I value that question, because it brings me back to, if I tell you to be, what are you going to do in order to do that? Because do you know how to be? If you find yourself wanting to come to a state of oneness, even just, and Shaykh said it beautifully last night, I think. He said, if any of you has stayed in meditation to quiet your mind and clear your mind just for 5 minutes uninterrupted, I will kiss your feet. Because again, it comes back down to how? And so this is the other thing. So we are one, and we theorize and we get to understand that, which is beautiful. But I may not be at a level of consciousness that you may be at, but we are one. So I'm mirroring in some way a lack in you, the other, right? And I think there needs to, for me, and one of the big things that I especially came here for is, I love being inspired. I love having to listen to transformation and knowledge to take that in, but I want to be able to know what to do with it afterwards. Because that is helping me move and evolve to my higher state of consciousness. And so, again, the question of, what do we do when we leave here? What is it that we do? What is the first step? Is the first step that I come home and every day I now, create my discipline of meditation? Because some of us don't. Is it now that I get to realize that I can actually physically step from my past or my future thoughts and step to my current now, in this moment, when I start my salah. It's physical things that I get to do to help me to become one and to become present. Because it's only through the presence that we are able to raise our consciousness. And it's only through the present moment that we are able to transform the shadow. Because as we transform the shadow, so do we evolve. That's what the shadow is there for. You know, no one's ever grown without challenge. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions? Yes?
Is it on? Thank you. A wonderful medieval mystic, German, Meister Eckhart, says, "The eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me." So there's just one eye. Not I, the personal, the I, the E-Y, yes, the I. And he also speaks elsewhere of a working mysticism that, to answer your question, or to look at your question, when we go back into the hustle and bustle, the actuality is always there, but sometimes we're on two levels. But it's always there. But we're living, and we have to live in this dimension, in this world. But I think that expression, the eye with which I see God, is the eye that God sees me. It's the unity, it's the non-duality. But perhaps for me, as I think of these things, and I must say it's lovely listening to this discourse. It's my first visit here, so thank you that I could come. It's most inspiring. But in terms of wondering what it's all about, in terms of the oneness and the diversity, 7 billion of us or so on this planet, maybe we could be seen as articulations of the divine. Each one of us, in our own way, is an articulation of the divine. And it doesn't really matter what we do or who we are. It's just another way that the divine is manifesting itself on this planet. So Meister Eckhart is a good friend. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really wonderful. Thinking about Muna's conversation, thinking about what has been spoken about here, one of the things that occurs to me is that it's so easy for us to judge and be very negative. And as we've just read from Shaykh Fadhlalla, those negative emotions are really what takes us away. It's what separates us. There's an acceptance, there's a freedom that comes with accepting things as they are, just as they are, and also understanding that however they are is an indication for where we can work and how we can move. So I think that there's a gratitude and an acceptance that is available to us there. I think we should probably bring this to a close in terms of time. Is there anything that anybody would like to say in terms of ending from our panel? Maybe Sadia, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to add?
I just have a few announcements.
Announcements. Oh, okay. That's a good way to end.
Thank you for being such wonderful attendees and participants. There's supper being served now in the Romana. Please do come and have some dinner with us. Reminder that there is at 8 o'clock at Lemon Jack, a Qawwali evening. Do make sure you're there in good time to find a decent space in their studio there. Will the Qawwali be recorded as well? Do we know? No, it's not going to be. So it's a live performance, no recordings. And we look forward to seeing you afterwards tomorrow morning here. Again, the same time, 9:30, for a 10 o'clock start.
You know what, my wish would be that we start at 9:30, because then
Wonderful. There are many interesting presentations tomorrow. And let's make the intention before we go to sleep tonight to be here at 9 for a 9:30 start, inshallah. Bismillah. Thank you all. Bless you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. Oh, I thought that you can buy now the tickets at the theatre. If you haven't already paid here and registered, there is a list of people who've already paid. It's 200 rands.